The Galactic Naval Academy's main corridor buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Cadets from dozens of species hurried between classes, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes against the pristine white walls. The morning light from the artificial sun streamed through the massive windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Zara Chen walked quietly through the crowd, her human form noticeably smaller than most of her classmates. At 5 feet 4 inches, she barely reached the shoulders of the average Korthak warrior or the mid-torso of a Zentorian giant. Her black hair was pulled back in the regulation style, and her dark eyes took in everything around her with careful attention. She had been at the academy for 3 months now, and still felt like an outsider. Earth had only recently joined the Galactic Federation, and humans were still a curiosity to most species. Some viewed them with interest, others with suspicion, and many simply ignored them as another minor species trying to find their place among the stars. The academy itself was impressive beyond anything Earth had ever built. The main complex stretched for miles, with training facilities that could simulate any environment in the known galaxy. The technology here was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed, and every day brought new wonders and challenges. Zara's destination was the Advanced Combat Theory classroom, where Professor Vextar would be discussing fleet formations used in the border wars. She enjoyed these classes, even though many of her fellow cadets seemed to think humans had nothing valuable to contribute to military strategy. As she turned the corner toward the classroom wing, she heard raised voices echoing from ahead. The sound made her slow her pace and listen carefully. In the 3 months since arriving, she had learned that conflicts between cadets were not uncommon, but they were usually handled quickly by the Academy's strict discipline system. "You think you belong here, dirt crawler?" The voice was deep and rumbling, definitely Korthak. The species was known for their warrior culture and their belief that strength determined worth. "Your people couldn't even reach their own moon without primitive chemical rockets." Zara moved closer, keeping to the shadows near the wall. Around the corner, she could see a group of 5 cadets surrounding someone pressed against the wall. 4 of the attackers were Korthaks, their red skin and muscular builds making them look like walking tanks in their blue academy uniforms. The 5th was a Zentorian, tall and thin with pale blue skin and 4 arms. The cadet trapped against the wall was clearly human. Zara recognized him as Marcus Webb, a first-year cadet like herself. He was taller than Zara but still much smaller than his tormentors. His blonde hair was messy, and there was already a bruise forming on his left cheek. "I'm not looking for trouble," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the obvious fear in his eyes. "I just want to get to class." The largest Korthak, who seemed to be the leader, laughed. "Trouble found you, human. You and your pathetic species think you can just walk in here and pretend you belong among real warriors?" Zara felt her jaw tighten. She had experienced similar attitudes herself, though usually expressed more subtly. Many of the older species viewed humans as primitive newcomers who had been admitted to the academy more out of political necessity than actual merit. "The Federation accepted Earth as a member," Marcus replied, trying to maintain his dignity. "We earned our place here." "Earned?" The Zentorian spoke for the first time, his voice high and thin. "What has your species ever accomplished? You've been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. Most of us have been traveling between stars since before your species discovered fire." The Korthak leader stepped closer to Marcus, using his superior height to intimidate. "Your species is weak. Soft. You have no warrior tradition, no honor. You're only here because the council feels sorry for you. That's enough." Marcus tried to push past them, but the Korthaks immediately blocked his path. "We're not finished," the leader growled. "Someone needs to teach you your place in the hierarchy. Consider this a lesson in galactic politics." Zara watched as the Korthak raised his massive fist. The alien's arm was easily twice as thick as Marcus's, and the blow would likely break bones. She saw Marcus tense, preparing for impact, but unable to defend himself against 5 opponents. The academy had strict rules against violence between cadets, but Zara knew that enforcement was often selective. Humans were new and had few allies among the faculty. A human cadet injured in a training accident might not receive much investigation, especially if the attackers claimed self-defense. Time seemed to slow as she watched the Korthak's fist begin its descent toward Marcus's face. The alien's movement was powerful but telegraphed, following the straightforward combat style that Korthaks were known for. They relied on strength and intimidation rather than finesse or speed.
Without conscious thought, Zara moved.
Her 3 months at the academy had included intensive physical training designed to help different species work together despite their various physiological differences. She had learned to use her smaller size and greater agility to her advantage. She darted forward from her hiding spot, her feet silent on the polished floor. The attackers were so focused on Marcus that they didn't notice her approach until she was already in motion. The Korthak's fist was halfway to Marcus's face when Zara's hand intercepted it. Her palm met the alien's knuckles with a sharp crack that echoed through the corridor. The impact sent a shockwave up her arm, and she felt the bones in her hand protest against the force, but her grip held firm. The sudden stop of his punch caught the Korthak completely off guard. He stared at Zara in shock, his small black eyes wide with surprise. The other attackers froze, equally stunned by the unexpected intervention. "What does the leader began?" But Zara didn't give him time to finish. Using the momentum from catching his punch, she twisted the Korthak's arm and stepped into his space. Her knee came up hard into his midsection, finding the soft spot just below his ribcage that was common to most humanoid species. The alien doubled over with a grunt of pain and surprise.
5 against 1? Zara said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline rushing through her system. "That's not warrior behavior. That's coward behavior."
The other 3 Korthaks recovered from their shock and moved toward her, but Zara was already in motion. She had learned during her training that humans had several advantages that other species often overlooked. Their reaction times were faster than most, their joints were more flexible, and they had developed combat techniques based on using an opponent's strength against them. The second Korthak reached for her with both hands, trying to grab her shoulders. Zara ducked under his arms and swept her leg behind his knees. The alien crashed to the floor with a satisfying thud that echoed through the corridor.
The Zentorian moved next, his 4 arms giving him multiple attack angles.
But his height worked against him in the confined space, and his longer limbs meant he had to be careful not to hit his own allies. Zara stayed close to him, inside the reach of his arms, and delivered quick strikes to pressure points she had learned in her xenobiology classes. The remaining 2 Korthaks tried to coordinate their attack, but they were used to relying on intimidation rather than actual combat skills. Their movements were clumsy and predictable, designed for fighting opponents who would either submit immediately or engage in straightforward brawls.
Zara moved between them like water, using their own momentum against them.
When one tried to grab her, she redirected his force to send him stumbling into his companion. When another threw a punch, she guided it past her and used the opening to strike back. Within 30 seconds, all 5 attackers were on the ground, groaning and trying to figure out what had happened. Zara stood in the center of the corridor, breathing hard but uninjured except for her aching hand. Marcus stared at her with his mouth open.
"How did you?
They're twice your size." "Size isn't everything," Zara replied, flexing her fingers to make sure nothing was broken. "My martial arts instructor back on Earth used to say that a smaller fighter who thinks has a big advantage over a larger fighter who doesn't." The Korthak leader struggled to his feet, his face dark with rage and embarrassment.
How dare you attack us? We were just having a discussion with your fellow human. A discussion that involved 5 of you cornering one cadet and threatening him with violence?" Zara stepped between Marcus and the larger aliens. "Interesting definition of discussion. This isn't over," the Zentorian hissed, using his 4 arms to pull himself upright.
"Humans think they're clever, but there are consequences for interfering in affairs that don't concern you."
"Actually, it does concern me," Zara said.
"Marcus is my species mate and my fellow cadet.
When someone threatens him without cause, they threaten me too."
The Korthaks were all standing now, their faces showing a mixture of anger and confusion. They had never encountered a human who could fight back effectively, and they clearly didn't know how to process what had just happened. "You got lucky," the leader snarled.
Next time, you might want to pick on someone who actually wants to fight," Zara interrupted. "Or better yet, focus on your studies instead of bullying other cadets." The sound of approaching footsteps made everyone turn. Professor Corinth, a tall Altarian with silver skin and multiple eyes, was walking toward them with several other cadets following behind. His expression was stern, and his multiple pupils were focused on the scene before him. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?"
Professor Corinth's voice carried the authority of someone used to command.
"Cadets, explain yourselves immediately."
The Korthaks exchanged glances, clearly trying to decide what story to tell.
The Academy's surveillance systems would have recorded everything, but the footage would need to be reviewed before any official action could be taken. It was just a misunderstanding, Professor, the Korthak leader said, his voice now respectful and controlled. We were discussing combat techniques with our human classmates. Discussing combat techniques, Professor Corinth repeated, his multiple eyes focusing on each cadet in turn. And this discussion required 5 of you to surround 2 humans in a corridor? Marcus stepped forward. Professor, they were. Zara caught his arm and shook her head slightly. She had learned enough about academy politics to know that making formal accusations without absolute proof could backfire. Better to let the situation resolve itself naturally. We were just having a friendly sparring session, she said instead. Getting to know each other's fighting styles. Professor Corinth's expression suggested he didn't believe a word of it, but he also recognized the political complexity of the situation. Humans were still new to the Academy, and any conflict could have broader implications for Earth's relationship with the Federation. I see, he said finally. In the future, all sparring sessions will take place in designated training areas with proper supervision. Is that understood? Yes, Professor, came the chorus of replies. Good. Now all of you get to your classes. And, remember, cadets, the Academy exists to create unity among the species of the Federation, not division. As Professor Corinth walked away with his group, the Korthaks and the Zentorian gathered themselves together. The leader looked at Zara with an expression that mixed respect with continued hostility. This isn't finished, he said quietly. Humans may be clever, but cleverness only goes so far. Maybe, Zara replied. But, so far it's gone pretty far. After the aliens left, Marcus turned to Zara with gratitude written across his face. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't intervened. You would have figured something out, Zara said. But, we need to be careful. Making enemies on our first year isn't ideal, but sometimes it's unavoidable. How did you learn to fight like that? Marcus asked as they began walking toward their classroom. That was incredible. My father was military, and my mother taught martial arts, Zara explained. They both believed that humans would need every advantage we could get when we finally met other species. Turns out they were right. As they entered the classroom, Zara noticed several other cadets watching them with new interest. Word of the corridor incident would spread quickly through the Academy, and she wasn't sure if that would be good or bad for the human contingent. Professor Vextar, an elderly Thoraxian with a shell-like exoskeleton, looked up as they entered. Ah, our human representatives. Please take your seats. Today we will be discussing the tactical failures of the Third Border War. Zara and Marcus found seats near the back of the classroom. As the professor began his lecture, Zara found herself thinking about the encounter in the corridor. She had acted on instinct to protect a fellow human, but she realized that her actions might have larger consequences. The Academy was more than just a military school. It was a place where the future leaders of the Galactic Federation were trained and where relationships between species were formed. What happened here would influence humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. During the lecture, she noticed several non-human cadets glancing back at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect to concern. The Korthaks and their Zentorian ally had friends and allies among the student body, and word of their humiliation would spread quickly. But there were also cadets from other species who seemed impressed by what they had witnessed. A group of Valdorian cadets near the front kept looking back at her and whispering among themselves. The Valdorians were known for valuing skill and courage above physical strength, and they might see humans in a new light after today. As the class progressed, Professor Vextar discussed how smaller, more mobile forces had defeated larger armies through superior tactics and coordination. The parallels to her own recent encounter were not lost on Zara, and she found herself taking detailed notes. The key factor in these victories, the professor was saying, was not the size of the forces involved, but their ability to adapt to changing circumstances and exploit their opponent's assumptions. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "Sounds familiar." Zara nodded. The Korthaks had assumed that their size and numbers would guarantee victory. They hadn't considered that their human opponents might have different strengths and capabilities. When the class ended, several cadets approached them as they gathered their materials. A tall Valdorian female with purple skin and elaborate facial markings spoke first. "Excuse me," she said, her voice musical and precise. I am Lyra Shandar. I wanted to introduce myself and express my admiration for your actions today. Word travels fast, Zara observed. The Academy is a small community, Lyra replied. And what you did was impressive. Many cadets talk about honor and warrior traditions, but few act on them when it matters. A small group had gathered around them now, cadets from various species all looking at Zara with interest. She realized that this was a moment that could define how humans were perceived at the Academy. We all have our strengths, she said carefully. Humans might be physically smaller than some species, but we've learned to make up for it in other ways. What other ways? Asked a young Regelian cadet, his large eyes wide with curiosity. Zara thought about how to answer that question without revealing too much about human capabilities while still making an impression. Earth's military leaders had been very careful about what information they shared with the Federation, knowing that knowledge of human strengths and weaknesses could be used against them. We're adaptable, she said finally. Humans had to learn to survive on a planet that was constantly trying to kill us. We developed techniques for dealing with bigger, stronger opponents because we had to. Interesting, Lyra mused. Perhaps humans have more to offer the Federation than some people believe. As the group dispersed, Marcus walked with Zara toward their next class. That went better than I expected, he said. I thought we'd be pariahs after getting into a fight on our first semester. It's not over yet, Zara warned. The court hacks won't forget what happened, and they have friends. We need to be careful and stick together. Agreed. But at least now some of the other species know that humans aren't pushers. As they walked through the corridors, Zara noticed the change in how other cadets looked at them. There was less dismissal and more curiosity. Some still seemed hostile, but others appeared genuinely interested in learning more about humans and their capabilities. The rest of the day passed without incident, but Zara could feel the undercurrents of tension throughout the Academy. The human contingent was small, only 12 cadets total, and they would need to be smart about how they handled the new attention they were receiving. That evening, Zara met with the other human cadets in their common area. The space was modest compared to the facilities provided to some other species, but it served as a gathering place where they could discuss their experiences and support each other. Marcus had already told the others about the morning's events, and they were all eager to hear Zara's perspective on what had happened. So what now? Asked Sarah Martinez, a red-haired cadet from the Mars colonies. Do we expect retaliation? Probably, Zara admitted. But maybe not in the way we might expect. The court hacks are going to be embarrassed about losing a fight to a human half their size. They might try to prove themselves in other ways. Like challenging us to formal combat, suggested David Kim, a tall Asian cadet who specialized in engineering systems. Possibly. Or they might try to sabotage our academic performance, spread rumors about humans being untrustworthy, or find other ways to undermine our position at the Academy. The group discussed various strategies for dealing with potential problems. They agreed to stay together when possible, watch each other's backs, and avoid giving their opponents any legitimate reasons to file complaints against them. There's something else to consider, said Elena Rodriguez, one of the older cadets who had military experience before joining the Academy. What happened today might have actually helped our position here. How so? Marcus asked. Think about it. For months, the other species have seen us as weak newcomers who got admitted to the Academy for political reasons. Today, Zara proved that humans can hold their own in a fight. That changes the perception. But it might also make us targets, Sarah pointed out. Maybe. But being feared is sometimes better than being dismissed. At least now they know we're not easy prey. As the discussion continued, Zara found herself thinking about the broader implications of her actions. She had acted instinctively to protect Marcus, but she realized that she had also been representing all of humanity in that corridor. The other species would judge humans based on what they had witnessed, and those judgments would influence how Earth was treated in the Federation. The responsibility felt heavy on her shoulders. She was just one cadet at a military academy, but her actions might affect the future of her entire species. It was both thrilling and terrifying to realize how much power individual actions could have in the complex web of galactic politics. Later that night, as she lay in her dormitory bunk, Zara reflected on the day's events. She had come to the Academy to learn about military science and to help humanity find its place among the stars.
She hadn't expected to become a symbol of human capability so quickly. Through her small window, she could see the stars scattered across the darkness of space. Somewhere among them was Earth, small and blue and fragile, depending on people like her to prove that humanity deserved its place in the Federation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. The confrontation with the court hacks was just the beginning of what she suspected would be a long and difficult journey. But, for the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As Zara made her way to the dining hall for breakfast, she found herself being approached by cadets from species she had never spoken to before. Word of yesterday's confrontation had spread far beyond what she had anticipated.
"Excuse me, Cadet Chen?"
The voice belonged to a Shalorian, a species known for their philosophical nature and their role as mediators in galactic conflicts. The alien had smooth, gray skin and large, thoughtful eyes that seemed to see everything.
"I am Kai the Moon Whisper. I was hoping we could speak."
Zara paused, her breakfast tray in hand.
"Of course. What can I do for you? I wanted to understand what motivated your actions yesterday.
From what I have observed, humans typically avoid direct confrontation with larger species.
Your intervention was unexpected."
Around them, other cadets were clearly listening to the conversation while pretending to focus on their own meals.
Zara realized that her answer would be heard by many and repeated to many more.
"Someone needed help," she said simply. "The situation wasn't fair, and I was in a position to do something about it."
"But surely you considered the risk to yourself? The court hacks could have seriously injured you."
Zara thought about the question carefully. In truth, she hadn't really considered the personal risk at the time. She had seen Marcus in danger and acted instinctively. "Risk is part of being a cadet," she replied. "We're all here to learn how to protect the Federation and its members. That includes protecting each other."
Kaida nodded slowly. "An interesting perspective. Many species believe that loyalty should be reserved for one's own kind first. Humans believe that strength comes from unity.
We learned that lesson the hard way on our own world." As Kaida walked away, Zara noticed several other conversations had stopped, and many cadets were looking at her with new interest. She found a seat next to Marcus and the other humans, trying to ignore the attention. "You're becoming famous," Marcus observed quietly.
"Is that good or bad?" Before Zara could answer, another cadet approached their table.
This one was an Exarian, a species known for their technological expertise and their generally neutral stance in galactic politics. The alien was tall and thin, with blue-tinted skin and large, intelligent eyes.
"Cadet Chen, I am Vexian Star Weaver. I work in the Academy's Combat Analysis Laboratory. Would you be willing to participate in some voluntary testing?"
"We are interested in documenting the combat capabilities of different species for training purposes."
Zara exchanged glances with Marcus.
This could be an opportunity to demonstrate human capabilities, but it could also be a way for other species to gather intelligence about human weaknesses.
"What kind of testing?" she asked.
"Basic physical assessments, reaction time measurements, tactical problem-solving scenarios. Nothing invasive or dangerous. The data would be used to help develop training programs that accommodate the strengths of different species."
"I'd need to think about it," Zara said diplomatically.
"Of course.
Please let me know when you have decided." After Vexian left, Sarah leaned in close.
"That could be dangerous. If they learn too much about how humans fight, they could develop countermeasures. Or, Elena suggested, it could be an opportunity to show them that humans have capabilities they haven't considered." The debate continued as they finished breakfast and headed to their morning classes.
Zara found herself distracted throughout the lectures, thinking about the implications of the attention she was receiving.
During their tactical analysis class, Professor Corinth announced a surprise exercise.
"Today we will be running combat simulations in teams. Each team will consist of 5 cadets from different species.
The goal is to learn how to coordinate diverse capabilities in battle situations."
Zara felt her stomach drop as she realized this could be another setup.
If she was placed on a team with hostile cadets, they could easily sabotage her performance or create situations that made humans look incompetent.
Professor Corinth began reading team assignments. "Team Alpha, Kortheke Ironbreaker, Zentari Skiricher, Rigelian Stargazer, Human Chen, and Valdorian Shandar. Zara noticed that Kortheke Ironbreaker was the leader of yesterday's group of attackers. The assignment couldn't be a coincidence.
Professor Corinth was either testing how they would work together or setting up a situation where conflicts could be resolved through official channels.
As the teams assembled, Zara found herself standing with 4 aliens who towered over her. Kortheke glared at her with obvious hostility, while Zentari seemed equally unfriendly.
The Rigelian appeared nervous, and Lyra Shandar, the Valdorian who had spoken to her yesterday, seemed curious about how the dynamic would play out.
The scenario is simple, Professor Corinth announced. Each team must infiltrate a fortified position, disable the defense systems, and extract valuable intelligence. You have 30 minutes to plan your approach and 2 hours to complete the mission. You will be evaluated on teamwork, tactical thinking, and mission success. Kortheke immediately took charge.
I will lead the frontal assault.
Zentari will provide covering fire. The rest of you will stay back and provide support. That's not a plan, Zara said quietly. That's a suicide mission.
Kortheke turned to face her, his eyes blazing with anger.
I didn't ask for your opinion, human.
Your species has no military tradition worthy of respect.
Maybe not, Zara admitted.
But we do have experience with impossible situations.
Lyra stepped forward.
Perhaps we should hear all perspectives before making decisions. The exercise requires teamwork, not dominance.
Fine, Kortheke growled. What do you suggest, human?
Zara pulled out her tactical pad and brought up the mission briefing. The target was a mock fortress with multiple layers of defense, including automated weapons systems, patrol routes, and electronic countermeasures. The direct approach won't work, she said, highlighting weak points on the fortress diagram.
But look at this.
The fortress has a ventilation system that connects to the main power distribution center. If we can get someone inside through the vents, they could disable the power grid and create openings for the rest of the team.
The vents are too small for any of us, Zentari pointed out. Too small for you, Zara corrected. But I could fit.
And, once the power is down, the automated defenses will switch to backup mode, which has much slower response times.
Kortheke studied the diagram reluctantly. Even if you could get inside, how would you deal with the security systems? The electronic locks require advanced hacking skills. Zara smiled. Humans have been dealing with electronic security systems for over a century. We're pretty good at finding ways around them.
The Rigelian, who had been silent until now, spoke up.
The plan has merit.
My species has excellent hearing and could monitor guard patrol patterns to provide timing for the infiltration.
And I could create diversions to draw attention away from the ventilation access points, Lyra added.
Kortheke looked around at his team, clearly unhappy about not being the center of the plan but unable to find fault with the logic.
Fine. We try the humans' plan. But, if it fails, we go with direct assault.
The next hour was spent refining the approach and practicing coordination. Despite their personal animosity, the team began to function effectively. Each species brought different strengths to the table, and Zara found herself impressed by how well they could work together when they focused on the mission rather than their prejudices.
When the simulation began, everything went according to plan. The Rigelian's acute hearing allowed them to track guard movements with perfect precision.
Lyra created exactly the right kind of distraction at exactly the right time.
Zentari used his forearms to boost Zara up to the ventilation access point with smooth efficiency.
The real challenge came when Zara was inside the fortress, crawling through the narrow ventilation shafts toward the power center. The space was barely wide enough for her shoulders, and she had to navigate by feel in complete darkness. This was where her smaller size became a crucial advantage rather than a liability. When she reached the power center, she found herself facing a complex array of electronic systems that would have been impossible for larger cadets to access. The control panels were designed for maintenance technicians, not combat situations, and required precise manipulation in cramped spaces. Zara's years of studying human computer systems paid off as she identified the key components and began the process of safely disabling them. She couldn't simply destroy the systems, as that would trigger emergency lockdowns. Instead, she had to carefully redirect power flows and create controlled failures that would appear to be malfunctions. Outside, her teammates were executing their parts of the plan with impressive coordination.
Korthe K had positioned himself to take advantage of the power failures when they occurred. Zentari was ready to provide covering fire from multiple angles. The Rigelian continued to track guard movements and provide real-time updates.
Lyra maintained her diversion activities, drawing more and more guards away from critical areas. When Zara successfully disabled the main power grid, the fortress's defenses immediately switched to backup mode, just as she had predicted. The automated weapon systems slowed their response times, the electronic locks defaulted to manual operation, and the guard communication systems experienced significant interference. Korthe K led the assault with perfect timing, taking advantage of the confusion and system failures. His natural warrior instincts and physical strength were exactly what the team needed once the defensive systems were compromised. Zentari's multiple arms allowed him to operate several pieces of equipment simultaneously, overwhelming the reduced defenses. Within 20 minutes of the power failure, the team had successfully infiltrated the fortress, disabled all remaining defenses, and extracted the required intelligence. They had completed the mission in half the allotted time with no casualties and minimal detected presence. As they regrouped at the extraction point, Professor Corintha's voice came over the communication system.
Excellent work, Team Alpha. Report to debriefing room 7 for mission analysis. During the walk back to the main complex, the team dynamics were noticeably different. Korthe K walked beside Zara rather than avoiding her, and there was a grudging respect in his expression. Your plan worked, he said simply. Our plan worked, Zara corrected. I couldn't have done any of it without the rest of you. And the assault phase required exactly the kind of warrior skills that court hacks are famous for. Still, Lyra observed, the human approach to the problem was unconventional. Most species would have focused on overcoming the defenses through superior firepower or technology. Humans learned early that we couldn't always win through strength or advanced equipment, Zara explained. We had to find other ways to succeed. The debriefing session was illuminating. Professor Corinth analyzed their performance in detail, highlighting both strengths and areas for improvement. What struck Zara most was how effectively the different species had complemented each other when they focused on their common goal. Team Alpha demonstrated several important principles today, Professor Corinth noted. First, that diverse teams can achieve results that homogeneous teams cannot. Second, that leadership can come from unexpected sources when circumstances require it. And, third, that assumptions about capabilities based on physical appearance can be misleading. After the debriefing, as the team was disbanding, Korthe K approached Zara privately. His expression was serious, and she prepared herself for another confrontation. I owe you an apology, he said, his deep voice carrying an undertone of sincerity that she hadn't heard before. Yesterday, I acted according to prejudices about your species. Today, you proved those prejudices wrong. Zara was surprised by the admission. We all have preconceptions about other species. What matters is whether we're willing to change our minds when we learn new information. My people value strength and honor in combat. What you did today, that was both strong and honorable. I will not forget it. Neither will I. And I hope we can work together again in the future. As Korthe K walked away, Zara reflected on how much had changed in just 2 days. She had arrived at the academy as an unknown cadet from a newly admitted species. Now she was beginning to establish a reputation and build relationships that could influence humanity's future in the Federation. The afternoon brought more challenges as word of Team Alpha's success spread through the academy. Other cadets began approaching her with questions about human tactics and capabilities. Some were genuinely curious, others seemed to be fishing for information that could be used strategically. During her evening meal, Zara found herself sitting with a mixed group of cadets from various species rather than just with the other humans. The conversation ranged across topics from military strategy to cultural differences to the challenges of creating unity among such diverse groups. What I don't understand, said a young Altarian cadet, is how humans develop such sophisticated tactics when you've only been spacefaring for such a short time. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years, Zara replied honestly. Humans learned to be innovative in combat because we had to be. Our planet was divided into hundreds of different nations, all competing for resources and territory. That sounds chaotic and destructive, observed the Rigelian from her team. It was. But it also forced us to constantly develop new strategies and technologies. We couldn't rely on physical superiority or inherited advantages. We had to think our way out of problems. And now you bring those skills to the Federation, Lyra noted. It's an interesting addition to our collective capabilities.
The conversation continued late into the evening, covering topics that Zara had never expected to discuss when she first arrived at the academy. She found herself serving as an informal ambassador for humanity, explaining not just what humans could do, but why they thought and acted the way they did. When she finally returned to her dormitory, she found a message waiting on her personal communication device. It was from Admiral Harrison, the human officer who served as liaison between Earth and the Academy administration. Cadet Chen, your recent activities have come. The Strategic Innovation Competition was held in the Academy's most prestigious facility, a vast amphitheater that could accommodate representatives from all Federation species. Zara arrived early, wanting to familiarize herself with the environment before the other competitors arrived. The competition arena was impressive beyond anything she had imagined. Holographic displays surrounded a central tactical table that could generate three-dimensional representations of entire star systems. Advanced computers provided real-time analysis of fleet movements, resource flows, and strategic implications of every decision. As other competitors began arriving, Zara was struck by their diversity and obvious competence. There was Vorthak Ironsoul, a Korthak cadet whose family had produced military leaders for 15 generations. Zelandra Mindweaver, a Zentorian whose four-armed coordination allowed her to manage multiple tactical displays simultaneously. Telchar Voidwalker, an Altarian whose species had been developing military strategies since before humans discovered agriculture. Each competitor represented not just their individual abilities, but centuries or millennia of military tradition from their respective species. Zara suddenly felt very young and very human among these cadets who seemed born for strategic warfare. The competition format was explained by General Kexmar, the Academy's Strategic Studies Director. Today's scenario involves a critical situation facing the Federation. The hegemony forces have launched a coordinated attack on three strategically vital systems simultaneously. Federation resources are stretched thin, and conventional responses will likely result in the loss of at least one system. Zara studied the initial briefing materials, noting the complexity of the situation. The three threatened systems were each critical for different reasons. Kepler Prime was a major industrial center producing advanced starship components. New Geneva served as a key agricultural world feeding several core Federation planets. Rigel Station controlled the most important hyperspace junction in the sector. Each competitor will have 2 hours to develop a comprehensive strategic response, General Kexmar continued. You will then present your plan to a panel of senior officers representing all major Federation species. Remember, there are no predetermined correct answers. We are looking for innovative thinking and practical solutions. As the competition began, Zara watched the other competitors dive into detailed analysis of fleet strengths, technological capabilities, and traditional military doctrines. Their approaches were sophisticated and well-reasoned, focusing on optimizing available resources and accepting calculated losses to protect the most critical assets. Vorthak's plan concentrated overwhelming force on defending Kepler Prime, reasoning that industrial capacity was most critical for long-term war effort. Zelandra developed an intricate coordination strategy that attempted to defend all three systems simultaneously through precise timing and resource allocation. Telchar proposed a strategic withdrawal from the least defensible positions to concentrate defenses where they could be most effective. Zara found herself approaching the problem from a completely different angle. While the other competitors were focused on the military aspects of the scenario, she was thinking about the underlying assumptions that made the situation seem impossible. The hegemony had launched simultaneous attacks precisely because they knew Federation doctrine would require defending all three systems. They were counting on Federation forces spreading themselves too thin and failing to mount effective resistance at any location. But what if the Federation didn't play by those rules? Instead of accepting the defensive framework that the hegemony had imposed, Zara began developing an offensive strategy that would force the enemy to react to Federation initiatives rather than the other way around. She started by analyzing the hegemony's own strategic vulnerabilities. To launch coordinated attacks on three Federation systems, they had necessarily weakened their own defensive positions. Their supply lines were extended, their reserves were committed, and their leadership was focused on managing complex offensive operations. This created opportunities that traditional defensive thinking would overlook. Zara's plan began to take shape around the concept of turning the hegemony strategy against them. Instead of trying to defend 3 systems against superior forces, she would use the Federation's remaining mobile assets to launch surprise attacks on hegemony territory. The key insight was that the hegemony couldn't maintain their offensive operations if their own core systems came under threat. They would be forced to choose between continuing their attacks and defending their home territory. Either choice would give the Federation strategic advantages. If the hegemony continued their attacks, Federation forces could capture or destroy critical hegemony infrastructure, crippling their long-term war capabilities. If the hegemony redirected forces to defend their own territory, Federation systems would have time to prepare proper defenses and, potentially, launch their own coordinated counterattacks. The plan required accepting short-term losses in exchange for strategic initiative. Some Federation territory would be temporarily occupied, but the overall position would be stronger than any purely defensive strategy could achieve. As Zara refined the details, she realized she was proposing something that went against the instincts of most Federation species. Accepting territorial losses, even temporarily, was psychologically difficult for races that valued honor and direct confrontation. But humans had learned that sometimes the best way to protect what mattered most was to temporarily sacrifice what mattered less. It was a hard lesson, learned through centuries of asymmetric warfare against superior opponents. When the 2-hour preparation period ended, the competitors were called to present their strategies to the evaluation panel. The panel consisted of senior officers representing the major Federation species, each bringing their own cultural and strategic perspectives to the assessment. Vorthak presented first, delivering a passionate argument for concentrating maximum force at Kepler Prime. His plan was bold and straightforward, reflecting Korthak military culture's emphasis on decisive action and overwhelming strength. Zelandra followed with her coordination strategy, using multiple display screens to demonstrate how precise timing could allow simultaneous defense of all 3 systems. Her presentation was technically sophisticated and showed deep understanding of logistical complexities. Telchar's strategic withdrawal plan was elegantly logical, minimizing losses while preserving the Federation's strongest defensive positions. His approach reflected Altarian strategic thinking's focus on long-term sustainability and measured responses. Then, it was Zara's turn. She began by acknowledging the quality of the previous presentations, but then challenged the fundamental assumptions they were all based on. Every previous plan accepts the hegemony's framework for this conflict, she said, using the holographic displays to illustrate her points. They attack, we defend. They choose the time and place of engagement, we respond to their initiatives. But what if we refuse to accept those rules? The panel members exchanged glances. General Kexmar leaned forward with obvious interest. Explain your alternative approach, Cadet Chen. Zara activated the tactical displays, showing the current positions of both Federation and hegemony forces. The hegemony's strategy depends on Federation forces acting predictably. They've calculated that we'll try to defend everywhere and succeed nowhere. But they've also created an opportunity. She highlighted the hegemony's extended supply lines and weakened defensive positions. To mount these coordinated attacks, they've committed most of their mobile reserves and left their own territory relatively undefended. This creates strategic vulnerabilities that purely defensive thinking wouldn't exploit. You're proposing offensive operations while Federation systems are under attack, asked Admiral Korshan, a Korthak officer whose expression was skeptical. I'm proposing using the hegemony's offensive strategy against them, Zara replied. Instead of trying to defend 3 systems against superior forces, we use our remaining mobile assets to threaten hegemony core systems. Force them to choose between continuing their attacks and defending their own territory. She walked through the details of her plan, showing how Federation forces could strike at critical hegemony infrastructure while their main forces were committed to offensive operations. The timing would be crucial, but the potential gains were enormous. This plan requires accepting temporary losses of Federation territory, observed Counselor Metha, a Shalorian officer known for her strategic wisdom. Yes, Zara admitted. Some Federation worlds would be temporarily occupied. But the alternative is likely permanent loss of at least one system, possibly more. This approach trades temporary tactical disadvantage for strategic initiative. And if the hegemony doesn't respond as you predict, asked Captain Telvar, representing the Altarian delegation. Then, we've weakened their infrastructure and industrial capacity while they've gained territory that will be difficult to hold without those same resources, Zara replied. Either way, the Federation's long-term position improves. The questioning continued for nearly an hour, with panel members probing every aspect of her strategy. They challenged her assumptions, tested her contingency planning, and explored potential failure modes. Zara found herself defending not just her tactical decisions, but the entire philosophical approach that underpinned her thinking. This strategy requires a level of strategic patience that many Federation species might find difficult to accept, General Kexmar observed. Temporarily accepting enemy occupation goes against the warrior instincts of races like the Korthaks, and the protective instincts of races like the Valdorians.
That's true, Zara acknowledged.
But it's also why this approach might be effective. The hegemony expects Federation forces to respond according to those same instincts.
Doing something unexpected could provide decisive advantages.
When the presentations were complete, the competitors were dismissed while the panel deliberated. Zara found herself in a waiting area with the other cadets, each wondering how their performance had been received.
Your approach was unusual, Vorthak commented.
Despite their earlier conflict, he had treated her with respect since their successful team exercise. I'm not sure my people would accept temporary occupation of Federation worlds, even for strategic advantage.
That's the challenge with any unconventional strategy, Zara replied. It requires convincing people to act against their instincts.
But, if it works, Zilandra observed, the results could be dramatically better than conventional approaches. The wait seemed to stretch forever, but, finally, General Kexmar returned with the panel's decision. His expression was unreadable as he addressed the gathered competitors. The evaluation panel has reached its decision.
Each presentation demonstrated exceptional strategic thinking and deep understanding of military principles.
However, one approach stood out for its innovation and potential effectiveness. Zara felt her heart racing as the general paused. Cadet Chen, your strategic framework represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking that the Federation military needs for future challenges. While your plan carries significant risks, it also offers the potential for decisive strategic advantage through unconventional thinking. The other competitors applauded politely, though Zara could see disappointment in their expressions. She felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Winning the competition was an honor, but it also meant even more scrutiny and expectations for future performance.
However, General Kexmar continued, recognition of innovative thinking is only the beginning. Cadet Chen, you will work with the Strategic Studies Department to develop your approach into a comprehensive doctrine that could be implemented in real-world scenarios.
As the formal ceremony concluded, Zara was approached by several senior officers who wanted to discuss her ideas in more detail. The conversations ranged from technical questions about implementation to broader philosophical discussions about the role of unconventional thinking in military strategy.
Admiral Harrison, the human liaison officer, was among those who congratulated her. Outstanding work, Cadet. You've demonstrated that human strategic thinking can contribute significantly to Federation military capabilities.
Thank you, sir. But I had a lot of help from the other human cadets.
This wasn't just individual effort. That collaborative approach is itself part of what makes human thinking valuable, the Admiral replied.
The ability to synthesize diverse perspectives and develop innovative solutions through teamwork. As the day concluded, Zara reflected on what had happened. She had won a prestigious competition by proposing strategies that went against the conventional wisdom of most Federation species. But, more importantly, she had demonstrated that human approaches to problem-solving could contribute something unique and valuable to the galactic community. The victory came with new responsibilities and expectations. She would be working directly with senior officers to refine her strategic concepts. Her performance would be studied and analyzed by military academies throughout Federation space. The pressure to continue innovating and contributing would be intense. But she also realized that she was no longer just representing herself or even just humanity at the Academy. She was helping to define what humanity could bring to the Federation's collective efforts to maintain peace and security across the galaxy.
That evening, the human cadets gathered to celebrate her victory.
The mood was jubilant, but also thoughtful as they discussed the implications of her success.
You've opened doors that didn't exist before, Elena observed. Other human cadets will have opportunities that weren't available before today.
And expectations, Sarah added. Everyone will expect humans to provide innovative solutions to difficult problems. That's not necessarily bad, Marcus suggested. If we can establish a reputation for creative problem-solving, it gives humanity a valuable role in Federation society.
As the celebration continued, Zara found herself thinking about the future.
The Academy was just the beginning of her military career. Someday she would serve aboard Federation starships, possibly commanding operations that could affect the lives of billions of beings across multiple star systems. The skills she was learning here, the relationships she was building, and the reputation she was establishing would all influence how effectively she could serve that broader purpose. Today had been an important step, but it was only one step in a much longer journey. Through the window of their common area, the stars looked different than they had when she first arrived at the Academy. They no longer seemed cold and distant. Instead, they looked like destinations, places where she might someday serve alongside beings from dozens of species, all working together to protect and advance the civilization they had built among the stars. The competition had proven that humans could contribute innovative thinking to military strategy. Now came the harder task of proving that they could implement those innovations effectively in real-world situations where the stakes were measured in lives and the survival of entire worlds. Zara was ready for that challenge. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that humanity as a whole was ready for it. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that would require every available capability and perspective. Humanity's unique contributions were not just welcome, but necessary for the Federation's continued success. The future was full of possibilities, and, for the first time since leaving Earth, Zara felt confident that she and her species were prepared to help shape that future in positive ways. 3 weeks after the strategic innovation competition, Zara found herself in a position she had never imagined when she first arrived at the Academy. She was working directly with the Strategic Studies Department, collaborating with senior officers to develop new tactical doctrines based on her unconventional approaches to military problems. The work was fascinating but demanding. Every day brought new challenges as they tried to translate theoretical concepts into practical operational procedures that could be used by Federation forces in real combat situations. Her primary collaborator was Commander Silthara, a Valdorian officer with decades of experience in both strategic planning and field operations. The commander had initially been skeptical of human strategic thinking, but had become increasingly impressed by the practical applications they were developing together. The challenge, Commander Silthara explained during one of their planning sessions, is making these concepts accessible to field commanders who have been trained in traditional approaches.
We're not just developing new tactics.
We're trying to change fundamental assumptions about how warfare should be conducted. They were working on a comprehensive manual that would introduce Federation officers to what they were calling asymmetric strategic thinking. The manual covered everything from basic principles to complex multi-system operations, with detailed examples and case studies.
Human military history provides excellent examples of these principles in action, Zara observed as they reviewed historical case studies.
But we need to be careful about how we present them. Some Federation species might see human warfare as primitive or overly aggressive. That's a valid concern, the commander agreed.
But it's also an opportunity to demonstrate that apparent primitiveness can sometimes mask sophisticated strategic thinking.
Their work was interrupted by an urgent communication from Academy Command. General Kexmar's image appeared on their holographic display, his expression serious.
Commander Silthara, Cadet Chen, I need to brief you on a developing situation.
The scenario you developed for the strategic competition has become unexpectedly relevant.
Zara felt her stomach drop.
Sir?
Intelligence reports indicate that hegemony forces are massing near the Outer Rim territories.
Their deployment patterns suggest they may be planning exactly the kind of coordinated offensive operation that your competition scenario addressed.
Commander Silthara leaned forward. How long do we have? Unknown.
But Federation Command wants your theoretical framework converted into actionable operational plans as quickly as possible.
This is no longer an academic exercise.
The next several days were a blur of intense activity. Zara found herself working around the clock with a team of senior officers, intelligence analysts, and strategic planners to adapt her competition strategy for real-world implementation. The stakes were overwhelming. If her unconventional approach failed in an actual military operation, the consequences would be measured in destroyed planets and lost lives.
But if traditional approaches were used and failed, the results would be equally catastrophic.
The key difference between theory and practice, explained Admiral Sior Shan, the Altarian officer overseeing the operation, is that real warfare includes variables that simulations can't account for. Political considerations, psychological factors, technological unknowns.
Zara was studying intelligence reports about hegemony capabilities when she noticed something that their previous analysis had missed.
The enemy's force distribution wasn't quite what they had assumed in the competition scenario. Commander Sulfura, look at this, she said, highlighting anomalies in the hegemony deployment patterns.
Their fleet composition suggests they're preparing for sustained occupation rather than quick strikes.
The commander examined the data carefully.
What does that change about our approach? It means they're even more committed to their offensive operations than we thought. But it also means they've invested more resources in support infrastructure that could be vulnerable to our counterattacks.
The revised strategy that emerged from this analysis was even more aggressive than Zara's original competition plan. Instead of simply threatening hegemony territory, Federation forces would target specific infrastructure that would be essential for maintaining extended occupation forces. This approach requires precise timing and coordination, Admiral Seorshan noted.
There's very little margin for error. Traditional approaches don't offer much margin for error either, Zara replied. At least this way we maintain strategic initiative.
As the planning continued, Zara found herself working with officers she had only heard about in her strategic studies classes. These were legends of Federation military operations, beings who had shaped galactic history through their decisions and actions. It was both inspiring and intimidating to realize that they were taking her ideas seriously enough to base major military operations on them. The responsibility was enormous, but it was also exactly what she had hoped to achieve when she first applied to the academy.
The breakthrough came when they received additional intelligence about hegemony logistics networks.
The enemy's extended supply lines were even more vulnerable than they had realized, with critical choke points that could be disrupted through carefully coordinated operations. If we can cut these supply lines at the right moments, Commander Sulfura observed, the hegemony occupation forces will be stranded without support.
And, unable to retreat effectively, Zara added. They'll be forced to surrender or face destruction without the possibility of reinforcement. The final operational plan was elegant in its complexity.
Federation forces would allow the hegemony to begin their attacks as expected, but would simultaneously launch precision strikes against key infrastructure targets.
The timing would create a cascade effect that would leave hegemony forces overextended and unsupported.
When the plan was presented to Federation Command, the response was mixed. Some officers were enthusiastic about the innovative approach and its potential for decisive results. Others were concerned about the risks and the departure from established military doctrine. This strategy requires trusting theoretical analysis over proven military principles, observed Fleet Admiral Kextera, the Supreme Commander of Federation forces.
If the analysis is wrong, the consequences could be catastrophic.
With respect, Admiral, Zara replied, our analysis of proven military principles suggests they're inadequate for this situation. The hegemony has planned their strategy specifically to defeat conventional Federation responses.
And, you believe your unconventional approach will succeed where conventional approaches would fail?
I believe it offers better odds of success. Traditional defensive strategies virtually guarantee the loss of at least one major system. This approach offers the possibility of not only preventing those losses, but of gaining strategic advantage. The debate continued for hours, with officers from different species bringing their own perspectives and concerns to the discussion. Korthak officers worried about the psychological impact of accepting territorial losses.
Valdorian representatives questioned the ethics of targeting civilian infrastructure. Altarian strategists wanted more detailed contingency planning for potential failure modes. Eventually, Fleet Admiral Kextera called for a decision.
Based on the analysis presented and the alternatives available, I'm authorizing implementation of the asymmetric strategy.
However, traditional defensive preparations will continue as backup options. As the meeting concluded, Zara realized that her theoretical work was about to be tested in the ultimate arena. Real ships with real crews would be implementing strategies that had originated in her strategic competition entry. Real worlds with billions of inhabitants would be affected by decisions based on her unconventional thinking. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming, but it was also energizing. This was why she had come to the academy, why she had pushed herself to excel in every challenge. The opportunity to make a real difference in the galaxy's future was worth every risk and every sacrifice. Over the following days, Federation forces began implementing the new strategy. Fleet movements were carefully coordinated to appear routine while actually positioning assets for the planned operations. Intelligence gathering intensified to provide real-time updates on hegemony activities. Zara found herself assigned to the Strategic Operations Center, where she could monitor the implementation of plans based on her concepts. It was surreal to watch fleet movements on galactic displays and know that those ships were following strategies she had developed. Commander Silthera worked beside her, providing experience and perspective that helped translate theoretical concepts into practical operational decisions. "This is the most complex military operation I've ever been involved in," she admitted. "But it's also potentially the most decisive." As hegemony forces began their expected attacks, everything proceeded according to plan. Federation systems came under assault just as intelligence had predicted, with enemy forces following deployment patterns that matched theoretical projections. But, instead of rushing to defend the threatened systems, Federation forces executed the carefully planned counterattacks against hegemony infrastructure. The operations required split-second timing and precise coordination across multiple star systems. The first phase of counterattacks succeeded beyond expectations. Key hegemony supply depots were destroyed or captured, communication networks were disrupted, and critical industrial facilities were rendered inoperable. The enemy's ability to maintain extended operations was severely compromised. But the real test came when hegemony commanders realized what was happening. Would they continue their attacks despite losing logistical support, or would they redirect forces to protect their own territory? The answer came within hours. Hegemony forces began withdrawing from their offensive operations to defend critical infrastructure that was under Federation attack. The strategic initiative had shifted exactly as Zara's analysis had predicted. With hegemony forces redirecting their attention, Federation defensive preparations became dramatically more effective. What had seemed like hopeless defensive situations suddenly became manageable as enemy pressure decreased. "The strategy is working," Commander Silthera reported during one of the operation updates. "Hegemony forces are abandoning their coordinated offensive to deal with our infrastructure attacks." "But we need to press the advantage," Zara replied. "If we let them reorganize, they might find ways to counter our approach." The next phase of operations focused on preventing hegemony forces from regrouping effectively. Federation units that had been conducting infrastructure attacks switched to targeting military assets that were retreating from offensive operations. The psychological impact on hegemony forces was as important as the physical damage. They had planned their strategy around the assumption that Federation forces would respond predictably to their attacks. When that assumption proved false, their entire operational framework became obsolete. Within 2 weeks, what had begun as a coordinated hegemony offensive had collapsed into a series of isolated defensive actions. Federation forces had not only prevented the expected losses but had gained significant strategic advantages. The success of the operation sent ripple effects throughout Federation space. Military academies began studying the campaign as an example of innovative strategic thinking. The strategic concepts that Zara had developed were being incorporated into standard Federation military doctrine. But, perhaps more importantly, the operation had demonstrated that unconventional approaches to military problems could produce extraordinary results when properly implemented. The Federation military establishment was beginning to recognize that diversity of thinking was as important as diversity of species for long-term success. When Admiral Harrison visited the academy to debrief the operation, he found time to speak with Zara privately about what had been accomplished. "Cadet Chen, what you've achieved here goes beyond military success," he said. "You've proven that human strategic thinking can make decisive contributions to Federation security. That's going to change how humans are perceived throughout the galaxy." "It wasn't just human thinking," Zara replied. "The strategy only worked because we could combine human approaches with the capabilities and perspectives of other Federation species." "That's exactly the point. You've shown that humans can serve as catalysts for bringing together diverse capabilities in new ways. That's a role that could define humanity's future in the Federation." As the debriefing sessions continued, Zara learned more about the broader implications of the successful operation. The hegemony's military capabilities had been significantly degraded, reducing the threat they posed to Federation worlds for the foreseeable future. But, more importantly, the Federation had demonstrated new capabilities that would influence how potential enemies planned future operations. The galaxy had become a more complex and uncertain place for those who threatened Federation interests.
The strategic principles you developed aren't just applicable to this one situation, observed General Kexmar during one of the analysis sessions.
They represent a new framework for thinking about asymmetric conflicts that could be valuable in many different contexts.
Zara found herself assigned to a new role within the Strategic Studies Department, helping to develop training programs that would teach these principles to Federation officers throughout the galaxy. It was challenging work that required her to think carefully about how to communicate unconventional ideas to audiences from very different cultural and military backgrounds. The training programs they developed emphasized not just the specific tactics that had been successful, but the broader principles of innovative thinking that made such tactics possible. The goal was to create a generation of Federation officers who could develop new approaches to whatever challenges they might face. As her final year at the academy began, Zara reflected on how much had changed since her arrival. She had come as an unknown cadet from a newly admitted species. Now she was recognized as an innovative strategic thinker whose concepts were being studied throughout Federation space. But, more importantly, she had helped establish humanity's role as contributors to Federation strategic capabilities. Future human cadets would face different expectations and opportunities than those she had encountered when she first arrived. The corridor where she had first defended Marcus seemed like a different world now. The relationships and reputation she had built since then had opened doors that she could never have imagined. But they had also created new responsibilities and expectations that would shape the rest of her career. As she walked through the academy's halls, she noticed that other cadets looked at her with respect and curiosity rather than dismissal or hostility. Humans were no longer seen as newcomers trying to prove themselves. They were recognized as valuable contributors to the Federation's collective security efforts. The change was symbolized by a new development in academy policies. For the first time, human strategic concepts were being included in required coursework for all cadets. Every future Federation officer would learn about asymmetric strategic thinking and its applications. "You've changed the academy," Marcus observed as they discussed the new curriculum requirements. "And probably changed how humans will be perceived throughout the Federation." "We've all changed the academy," Zara corrected. Everyone contributed to proving that humans deserve respect and recognition. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the academy communication system. "All cadets report to the main amphitheater for a special assembly." As they made their way to the assembly, Zara wondered what new development required gathering the entire academy population. The possibilities ranged from routine announcements to crisis briefings that could affect the entire Federation. The amphitheater was filled with cadets from dozens of species, creating the usual rainbow of colors and forms that characterized academy gatherings. But there was an unusual tension in the air that suggested this was no routine announcement. Commandant Esikatar took the podium, his expression serious but not alarmed. "Cadets, I have the privilege of announcing that the Academy has been selected to participate in the Federation's first multi-species strategic innovation project." The assembly buzzed with excitement and curiosity. Multi-species collaborative projects were rare and prestigious opportunities that could influence the direction of Federation policy and capabilities. "This project will bring together the most talented cadets from all Academy campuses to work on strategic challenges that require diverse perspectives and innovative thinking. Selection for participation is based on demonstrated excellence in both individual achievement and collaborative capability." Zara felt her pulse quicken as she realized where this announcement was likely heading. "I'm pleased to announce that our Academy will be represented by a team that has already demonstrated the potential of innovative multi-species collaboration. The team will be led by Cadet Chen, whose recent contributions to Federation strategic capabilities have gained recognition throughout military command." The announcement continued with details about the project timeline and objectives, but Zara found herself thinking about what this opportunity represented. She would be working with the most talented cadets from across Federation space, developing strategic concepts that could influence policy for generations. But, more importantly, she would be representing not just herself or the Academy, but humanity's approach to collaborative problem-solving on a galactic stage. The responsibility was enormous, but it was also exactly the kind of opportunity that could define the future relationship between humanity and the Federation. As the assembly concluded and cadets began discussing the announcement, Zara realized that her journey was entering a new phase. The Academy had provided the foundation for proving human capabilities. Now came the opportunity to help shape the Federation's future through collaborative innovation. The stars beyond the Academy's windows seemed brighter than ever, marking destinations where the strategic concepts they developed might someday be applied. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, but it was also full of possibilities for those willing to think creatively and work together across the boundaries of species and culture.
Zara was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.
The Multi-Species Strategic Innovation Project brought together 47 cadets from 15 different academy campuses across Federation space. Zara found herself in a conference facility that dwarfed even the impressive academy complex where she had spent the past year. The Central Federation Research Station orbited a massive gas giant whose swirling clouds provided a spectacular backdrop for their work. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate the environmental needs of every Federation species while providing advanced research and collaboration facilities. As team leader, Zara was responsible for organizing 46 of the most brilliant military minds from across the galaxy into an effective working group. The challenge was daunting, made more complex by the cultural and physiological differences between species that had evolved on completely different worlds. Her team included beings like Thexera Stormcaller, a brilliant Korthak strategist whose warrior culture emphasized direct action and personal honor. Zilthek Mindweaver, a Zentorian whose four-armed coordination made her exceptional at managing multiple tactical scenarios simultaneously. Veltar Voidwalker, an Altarian whose species had developed military strategy over millennia of interstellar conflict.
But there were also representatives from species Zara had never worked with before.
Crystalline beings whose thought processes operated on completely different timescales.
Gaseous entities whose distributed consciousness could analyze problems from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Energy-based life forms whose understanding of space and time challenged conventional strategic thinking. The project's mandate was both exciting and intimidating.
They were tasked with developing strategic frameworks for challenges that hadn't yet emerged, preparing the Federation for conflicts and situations that current doctrine couldn't address. The galaxy is changing rapidly, explained Director Morthan, the ancient Altarian scientist who oversaw the project. New technologies, emerging species, evolving political relationships. The strategic concepts that have served the Federation well may not be adequate for future challenges.
The first challenge was simply learning to communicate effectively across such diverse perspectives.
What humans considered logical progression, gaseous beings saw as inefficient linearity. What crystalline entities valued as comprehensive analysis, energy-based lifeforms viewed as unnecessarily time-consuming.
Zara found herself drawing on every lesson she had learned about leadership and collaboration.
Her experience at the Academy had taught her that diversity of thinking was a strength, but only if it could be coordinated effectively. We need to establish common frameworks that allow different cognitive approaches to work together rather than against each other, she suggested during one of the early planning sessions. Each perspective offers unique insights, but we need ways to integrate them into coherent strategic concepts. The breakthrough came when they began working on their first major scenario, a hypothetical conflict with an unknown enemy whose capabilities and motivations were completely alien to Federation experience. Traditional strategic analysis was impossible because there were no precedents or familiar patterns to analyze. This is exactly the kind of situation where diversity of thinking becomes essential, Thexera observed. My people's warrior traditions emphasize adapting to unknown opponents through direct engagement. But that approach might not work against enemies with completely different concepts of conflict.
Zilthek's forearms moved gracefully as she manipulated multiple data displays simultaneously.
Zentorian strategic culture focuses on patience and comprehensive analysis. But comprehensive analysis requires understanding the enemy's perspective, which may be impossible with truly alien opponents. The crystalline being, whose name roughly translated to harmony of infinite facets, communicated through modulated light patterns that the station's translation systems converted to speech. Our temporal perspective allows analysis of long-term patterns and consequences.
But short-term adaptation may be more critical against unknown enemies.
As the discussion continued, Zara began to see how their different perspectives could complement each other rather than compete. The key was developing strategic frameworks that could accommodate multiple approaches simultaneously. What if we designed strategic systems that could adapt their own operational parameters based on real-time analysis of enemy behavior, she suggested. Instead of trying to predict what unknown enemies might do, we create frameworks that can evolve their responses as they learn. The concept they developed became known as adaptive strategic architecture. Instead of fixed tactical doctrines, Federation forces would use strategic systems that could modify their own operational principles based on accumulated experience with new types of conflicts. The architecture included multiple analytical frameworks operating in parallel, each designed to identify different types of patterns and threats.
Corthic-influenced modules focused on direct action and rapid response.
Xantorian systems emphasized long-term coordination and resource optimization. Altarian frameworks provided historical analysis and precedent identification. But the breakthrough was integrating cognitive approaches that had no precedent in existing Federation doctrine.
Crystalline analytical systems could process